Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'd like to share with you the next episode in the story of Hung and Hoài, a new chapter, where what once seemed to have settled begins to reveal lingering echoes that have yet to fade. In the previous episode, after the days Hoài went missing deep in the forest, the family finally regained a sense of peace they had thought was lost forever. The tense search, the anxious waiting, the long nights that bordered on despair, all of it came to an end when Hung and Hoài were reunited. The moment they saw each other, all the fear that had built up over so long seemed to burst forth at once, leaving behind tears that were both painful and relieving. Little Tony was finally back in his mother's arms, and the soft rise and fall of his breathing made Hoài realize that she was still here, still alive, still loved, still part of a family that was waiting for her. The misunderstandings between Hung and his mother were gradually resolved as well. The cold glances faded, as did the harsh words weighed down by resentment. Once Hoài returned safely, the long-standing knots seemed to come into the light. During the simple meal at the kind old woman's home, the whole family sat together again. No grand speeches were needed, just quiet nods, eyes lingering on one another a little longer. There were no lavish dishes on the table, yet the meal felt unexpectedly warm, because it was shared by people who had just stepped back from the edge of loss and truly understood the value of still being able to sit beside one another. It seemed as though all the turmoil had ended there, when laughter returned to the small house, when Tony slept peacefully in his mother's arms, when Hoài could finally exhale after days of exhaustion. Yet behind that fragile calm, an unspoken worry still remained, unresolved. The old debt was still there, like a long shadow clinging to Hung's mother's life. The lone shark had not reappeared, but the possibility that he could return at any moment continued to hang over them all. Because of that, this peace was incomplete. It was like a calm surface of water with unseen currents flowing beneath, waiting for a single lapse to surge up again. Hung's mother never said it aloud, but the deep lines at the corners of her eyes, the long silences when she sat alone, told the whole story. The days of hiding and fear, the sleepless nights filled with anxiety, had worn her down completely. The peace she had now felt, to her, like nothing more than a temporary pause. That night, after the whole family had fallen asleep, the small house became quieter than ever. Only the sound of insects outside and the soft yellow light spilling from the porch remained. Hung sat alone in silence, as if facing the restless thoughts spinning endlessly in his mind. The gentle light revealed the pensive tension still etched on his face, untouched by everything they had just been through. He understood clearly that unless the debt was resolved once and for all, his mother would never truly be at peace. No matter how hard she tried to hide it, no matter how much she told herself that it was over, that fear would remain, seeping into each day of her life. The months of running and hiding, the times she had to bow her head, the moments of panic triggered by the slightest unfamiliar sound, all of it had drained her strength and spirit. Hung could no longer ignore it, nor could he allow that worry to spill over onto Hoài and Tony. He stood up and walked back into the house. His footsteps were so light they barely made a sound, as if he were afraid of disturbing the rare calm everyone was finally enjoying. His gaze stopped on Hoài sleeping beside Tony. After so many exhausting days, her face had finally softened in deep sleep. One of her hands still rested loosely on her child, an unconscious reflex, to protect him, to keep that small, precious life safely within her embrace. Hung stood there for a long time. In that moment, all his emotions rose at once, tenderness, guilt, and a quiet resolve slowly taking shape. He knew he could not allow the people he loved to continue living in fear. He could not let that vague, lingering dread become part of their family's life ever again. This peace, however fragile, was something he had to protect at all costs. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window frame, Hung sat down beside Hoài. The house was still wrapped in the quiet of a long night. Tony slept peacefully next to his mother, his breathing slow and steady. Hung spoke softly, telling Hoài everything that had weighed on his mind throughout the night, one thought at a time, without hiding or avoiding anything. He talked about his worries, about the unease that still hovered over his mother, about the old debt that remained like a scar that could not yet be erased, no matter how stable things might appear on the surface. Hung's voice grew lower as he shared the decision he had made. "I want to settle the money issue once and for all, so Mom won't be bothered anymore." His words were slow but firm, as though he had thought them through carefully before saying them. There was no hesitation left in his eyes, only clear determination, the resolve of a son, and also of a husband and a father who did not want the people he loved to continue living in fear. Hoài remained silent for a long moment. She didn't answer right away, only lowered her gaze slightly, looking at Tony, then back at Hung. She understood exactly what he was thinking. After everything they had been through, she also realized that avoidance would only prolong the problem, allowing the anxiety to linger without ever truly disappearing. Her silence was not uncertainty, but a way of sorting through her emotions, to be sure that this was a decision they were both ready to face together. Finally, Hoài nodded gently. "I trust you," she said, her voice quiet but steady. It was more than an answer, it was her placing her full trust in the man sitting before her. "Let's settle it clearly, so our family can truly have peace." Her words were soft, yet carried a deep longing, a peace no longer threatened, no longer shadowed by the past. That agreement eased Hung's heart somewhat. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but at least he would not have to walk it alone. With Hoài by his side, with her understanding and trust, his resolve felt even stronger. The following day, Hung took the initiative to call his younger sister, Tieu, and her boyfriend, Hoài, inviting them to come to their mother's house to discuss the matter. He didn't beat around the bush or hide the situation. This was no longer just his own problem, it concerned the whole family. He understood that to resolve it properly, they would need everyone's support, as well as clear and level-headed perspectives. When Tieu stepped into the house, she couldn't hide her unease. Old memories and past mistakes weighed heavily on her. Although she tried to appear calm, the moment she saw how much thinner her mother had become, how hollow her face looked after months of anxiety, her heart tightened. Words she had never managed to say caught in her throat, and silent tears slipped down her cheeks. She realized that the suffering her mother had endured was far greater than she had ever imagined. Hung's mother sat there quietly, without reproach or complaint. That very silence made Tieu's guilt deepen even more. She understood that if she did not stand with her brother to resolve this matter, the remorse in her heart would never truly fade. Hoài remained calm throughout. He listened attentively to every word Hung said, every detail about the debt, the past harassment, and the family's current worries. He did not interrupt or rush to conclusions. Instead, he analyzed the situation slowly and clearly, as if carefully fitting each piece into its proper place. Only after fully understanding the entire story did Hoài speak and propose a solution. He believed everything needed to be handled decisively and transparently, paying off the principal in full, having a clear witness present to prevent future disputes, and issuing a firm warning so the debt collector would understand that this family would no longer tolerate any form of harassment. In his view, only by resolving everything clearly, leaving no gray areas, could Hung's mother truly feel at ease, and only then could the family move forward without being dragged back by the past. The room fell into a brief silence after his proposal. Everyone was thinking, but this time the silence was no longer heavy. It carried the sense that a clear path forward was beginning to take shape, and that despite their different emotions, they were all looking toward the same goal, bringing an end to the long-standing worry that had weighed on them for so long. The whole family sat together in the small room. There were no longer harsh accusations, no layers of resentment piled up as before. The initial silence was not distance, but a settling of emotions that had gone through too many upheavals. Everyone understood that if they continued to cling to those old feelings, then even sitting side by side, true peace would be hard to find. Hung was the first to speak. He looked at his mother, then at Hoica, and finally at Tieu San. His voice was calm yet firm. The past. I want to let it all go. What matters is that from now on, our family stays together. He didn't raise his voice or carry blame in his words, just a clear choice. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about setting it down so they could move forward. In Hung's eyes, the tension was gone, replaced only by a simple wish to hold on to his family. Hoica sat beside him, listening quietly. When Hung finished, she spoke softly. Her voice was gentle, free of any resentment. She said she was willing to let go of all past grievances with Hung's mother, because after everything, what she wanted most was peace for her small family. The days she had been missing, the moments spent facing the thin line between life and death, had taught her that holding on to hatred only made the heart heavier. She didn't need apologies or bowed heads, only for everyone to look in the same direction. At that moment, Tieu San could no longer contain her emotions. She lowered her head deeply, her voice choking as she apologized to her brother and to Hoica for her past recklessness. The thoughtless choices, the careless words that had once complicated everything, now stood painfully clear in her heart. Her remorse didn't need many words, anyone could see it in her reddened eyes and her slightly trembling hands. The room fell quiet for a short while. It was the silence of confrontation, of emotions finally spoken after being suppressed for so long. Gradually, that heaviness faded, giving way to slow nods and gazes that lingered a little longer on one another. No grand promises were needed, quiet understanding alone was enough to make the room feel warmer. Once things had been put in order, once the knots in their hearts had begun to loosen, Hung decided to bring his mother home to live with the family. It wasn't an impulsive decision, but the result of long reflection. He understood that only by being close to her children and grandchildren could his mother truly feel at ease and begin a life free from fear. On the day they left the mountain house, Hung's mother stood still for a long time. She said nothing, only quietly looked back at the familiar space before her. That place was tied to a turbulent chapter of her life, mistakes that filled her with regret, losses that had forced her to live in remorse and loneliness. One by one, those memories passed through her thoughtful gaze. But this time, when she turned away, there was no sense of running anymore. It was a departure toward a new beginning, with a different state of mind. Her children waited by the car. No one urged her on, no one rushed her. That patience softened her heart. Finally, she stepped into the car, welcomed by the family's quiet yet loving presence. There were no loud tears in that moment, only the feeling that an old door had closed, making way for a new path ahead. Tony held her hand tightly, his small hand warm and reassuring. He looked up at her with clear, innocent eyes and said, "From now on, Grandma will live with me, okay?" That simple sentence made her eyes fill with tears, not of sadness, but because for the first time in a long while, she felt a complete sense of belonging. In the embrace of her children and grandchild, the burdens she had carried for so many years suddenly felt much lighter. And in that moment, she understood that forgiveness and love cannot erase the past, but they are enough to give people the courage to move forward. The door of the house closed as children's laughter echoed through the room, sweeping away the last lingering shadows of the past. Hung's mother sat in the middle of the living room, her figure still a little thin, but her eyes were very different now. She looked at her children and grandchildren gathered around her, watched Tony running back and forth, stopping every so often to giggle, and in that moment, her heart filled with a simple happiness she had not felt in a very long time. It wasn't a loud or exuberant joy, but a quiet warmth that seeped gently into every breath. She slowly reached out and took Hung's hand. The hand of her son, hardened by years of hardship and responsibility, now rested in hers, warm and steady. She turned to Hoài, her gaze lingering a little longer, as if wanting to carefully etch into her memory the image of a daughter-in-law who had endured so much loss yet still chose to stay, chose to love. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from overwhelming emotion. "Thank you, my children, for giving me a chance to start again." The words were simple, without embellishment, yet they carried everything she had held in her heart for so long. They were thanks for forgiveness, for compassion, for the fact that her children had not turned their backs on her, even when she herself had caused so much pain. In her eyes at that moment, there was no longer fear or defensiveness, only sincere gratitude. Hoài smiled softly, a gentle smile that needed no further words. She understood that sometimes understanding requires no explanation. Lytutieu sat close beside her mother, so close that she could feel the familiar warmth between them. For the first time in a long while, Lytutieu felt the full meaning of the word family, no longer fractured, no longer weighed down by guilt, but simply the presence of people willing to stand by one another. The atmosphere in the house seemed to slow down. Tony's laughter blended into the calm, making everything feel unexpectedly real and ordinary. It wasn't perfection, but it was a moment of wholeness, one in which everyone was fully aware that they were here, together, after everything they had been through. That evening, once the family had settled in, dinner passed in a rare gentleness. No one brought up the past, and no one tried to force cheerfulness. After the meal, Hung's mother remained seated as the light in the living room softened, creating a warm, quiet space. She spoke slowly, her voice lower but each word clear. "I will change. I must live in a way that is worthy of the forgiveness and love you have given me." Her words were not loud, but they touched the hearts of everyone there. It wasn't a hasty promise, nor something said merely to reassure others. It came after long reflection, after sleepless nights, after she had looked honestly at herself and the road she had traveled. In her voice was a quiet determination, a reminder to herself that she did not want to repeat the same mistakes ever again. No one spoke after that. Hung simply nodded slightly. Hoài looked quietly toward her mother-in-law. Lytutieu gently squeezed her mother's hand in response. The silence was no longer heavy, it became a shared understanding that needed no words. Everyone knew that what had just been spoken was not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a different life, slower, more peaceful, built on understanding, responsibility, and love. Under the warm yellow light, an old chapter quietly closed. And though the road ahead still held many unknowns, they all understood that as long as they carried this moment in their hearts, they had enough reason to move forward, together. After everything they had been through, when the tears had finally dried and the fears had slowly settled, they came to understand a truth that was simple, yet piercingly profound. Family is not a place without mistakes, nor a place where everyone is always right. Family is where, even after hurting one another, there is still enough compassion to reach out and hold hands once more. Where people dare to lay the past down, dare to let go of the pain they once carried, in order to preserve what still remains, kinship, love, and the chance to begin again. The doors of misunderstanding, resentment, and fear closed behind them, sealing off a chapter filled with storms and loss. Ahead lay days that seemed calmer and warmer, where generations could once again sit together under the same roof, share meals, and listen to the familiar rhythm of family life. But life has never been painted in only peaceful colors. When the past has just been forgiven, the future quietly opens the door to new trials. Will those changes endure? Will today's promises stand firm against tomorrow's storms? the answers still lie ahead. And their journey is far from over. Stay tuned for the next episode to continue following the unfolding story.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Ôi trời ơi.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today,
Tạm biệt mọi người nhé.